Hey all, this is Brown at I Have Brown, and today we're going to be talking about the movie Sushi Girl on DVD. Sushi Girl came out in 2012 and it was directed by Kern Saxton, and it's a bit of a throwback to the grindhouse and exploitation films of the 70s and I would argue early 80s as well. And you also have a generous helping of Reservoir Dogs thrown in for good measure. So some people would understandably think that Sushi Girl is a ripoff of Reservoir Dogs, but I would argue that while it was certainly influenced by Reservoir Dogs, it's not a straight up ripoff of Reservoir Dogs. And one of the reasons I say it is because you have a diverse cast of familiar faces, playing characters within the criminal underworld, and you have a screenplay by Destin, Pfaff, and Kern Saxton that kind of goes hand in hand with the actors playing the characters, to a point where, while we are definitely in the deep end of the criminal, underworld, and we're sort of deprived of straight up heroic characters to root for, we do have these characters that manage to be compelling in a rather twisted manner, and to the point where, we're along for the ride and morbidly entertained along the way. And you also have a good twister or two thrown in for good measure. But first time I watched this movie, I thought it was a decent movie, but I didn't think it was anything special. But then I watched it again with one of the commentary tracks, namely the commentary that included the majority of the main cast. And after listening to that and having watched it while listening to the commentary, there were certain things that clicked better the second time around, to where once I was finished watching it again, I came away thinking that, this was actually a good movie, but it's granted, it's not something that I'd want to watch again anytime soon or on a regular basis, because this is a very bleak and very sadistically violent movie, but, because of the efforts put in, by, the actors, playing the main characters, and the, darkly, comical screenplay that, shines through from time to time. It was morbidly entertaining, but not something I'm in a hurry to see again. So it is a good movie, but just not something that, you want to sit down and watch it with a family or anything like that, But on the other hand, if you do like exploitation films or grindhouse, type films, Sushi Girl is definitely worth, checking out. So, and also just for the cast alone, it's definitely worth noting. But the story kicks off where the character of Fish has just served his 6-year sentence and has been released. But the kicker is, he was released on good behavior, and he was actually supposed to have been serving a longer sentence because he was a part of a gang that had, committed this, diamond robbery. And, the gang had ultimately succeeded in the robbery, but due to an accident on the road and a minor body count, the rest of the gang ended up getting away scot-free, but Fish was left behind and ended up taking, the rap for the gang. And while the authorities tried to get him to talk, he refused to rat on his gang and, kept his mouth shut. And so for 6 years, he's been in prison, keeping silent, not snitching. But he ends up getting released early due to quote-unquote good behavior, and this comes courtesy of, his, former comrade in the group, or in the gang, and also a crime lord by the name of Duke. And so Duke, the reason that he's got Fish released early is because he's convinced that Fish knows the whereabouts of the diamonds that they stole, because while the gang had managed to get away, the diamonds disappeared. And so he's thinking that either Fish stole the diamonds himself and stashed them somewhere, or he knows, who took them. Like maybe he made a deal with someone on the outside. And so with this in mind, he not only, uses his underworld connections to get Fish released early from prison, but he also invites the surviving gang members to this particular party that he's throwing at this a Japanese restaurant that's sort of a derelict type place, but is nonetheless, still operational. And he wants to make this something unique. And so, while he's waiting for the gang members and Fish to show up, he has this woman who, for the purposes of the movie, is called the Sushi Girl. And she basically, her purpose is to lay on this table that the gang's going to be sitting at, and this sushi chef, played by Sonny Shiba, by the way, is going to, basically, cover her body, with portions of food, and so basically the whole idea is, on the further outside on her body that the food is, the safer it is, but the deeper, the location of the food, say, in her, I guess you could say, erogenous zone, the more dangerous it is, as in you start dealing with food that might have some poison in it. And so, the whole purpose for her is to just lay there and not say anything and not move, regardless of what happens. And she's being paid a lot of money for this, apparently. And so with that done, with her on the table and with all the food, laid upon her body, her naked body, I might add, the gang is brought in, or the gang gradually, shows up. And you have the character Crow, who's literally, a nut farm, a nutcase, who was actually sprung from a mental institution by Duke, just for this particular occasion. And granted, I mean, he has a limited amount of time in which, he can be out of the asylum, but, the point is, this guy's crazy and he's out. And so you also have the character of Max, who's a very bloodthirsty biker and a very sadistic individual and has a very short fuse. And you also have the character of, let's see, give me a sec, Francis, who is a bit of a cokehead and, a bit of a, sort of a pseudo tough guy. Like he tries to talk like he's a tough guy, but he's really not. And he's, kind of like one of those guys that has something to prove, he feels like, but he's constantly in the shadow of, the guys in the group that are genuinely monsters. So while he's a criminal, he's not quite a monster, if that makes any sense. But, with the gang together, they await the arrival of Fish. And so, Fish shows up and, they're all like, hey, welcome back and all that. And they sit down to eat and everything. And Fish, he's not happy to see these guys, because they're the ones who kind of got him into trouble in the first place. And they're the reason that he, was serving his time. And he's pointing out that, hey guys, I don't know what's going on here, but I didn't talk. I kept my mouth shut, so what the hell do y'all want with me? And, Duke tries to get him to say, well, hey, just relax. We're celebrating your early release. And Fish isn't buying it. And so Duke says, okay, tried to be nice about it, but here's the thing. And so he basically, lays down to Fish, why they're all gathered there, and he explains to him that, the diamonds went missing and, the diamonds that they stole, and Fish was the last one seen with them. And so, they'd actually interrogate one of the guys in the group. Yeah, it was Max, had actually interrogated a couple of police officers that they'd had on parole that had shown up at the scene, and mind you, these were dirty cops, but Max, even though he had sadistically interrogated these guys to the point where, they eventually died, they didn't know anything other than the fact that Fish was the last one that was seen with the diamonds. And so it's not looking good for Fish at this point. And Fish is, saying, guys, I didn't take them. I didn't have them. I can't give them to you because I don't have them. And so, at this point, Duke saying, trying to be nice here, just, tell us where the diamonds are. We'll even let you keep your cut. But Fish is, adamant that, he didn't take them. And, he had the bag, in his hands, but he doesn't know what happened to the diamonds. And so he just keeps on saying, whatever it is you got me here for, you're wasting your time. And so at that point, Duke, basically just says, okay, we tried to do this the nice way. And so at that point, he and the gang, they duct tape Fish to a chair, like to the point where he's, wrapped up in tape and to where he can't get out of it. Like he can talk, but he can't really move. Like he can't get out of the chair. And so, that's when Duke, brings out this timer, and he explains to him that after telling Fish, a very grim story, from his past involving his father, and his form of, psychological and physical abuse involving said timer, he tells Fish that here's what we're going to do. We're going to, basically, give, each, member of the gang a certain amount of time with you, and they're going to torture you. And, and the torture will stop as soon as you tell us, where the diamonds are, but the longer you go without talking, the worse the torture is going to get. And so, so basically, they set the timer, and the gang members, each take a turn torturing, Fish, and it's not pretty. And, Fish, he is subjected to, excruciating forms of, of torment. And while this is going on, you also have some old wounds opening up within the gang. I mean, aside from the literal wounds that are being opened up on Fish, but, you have sort of division within the ranks. I mean, you have Crow and Max constantly bickering at each other and, constantly, at risk of, trying to kill each other, while they're supposed to be torturing Fish. And then you have Francis, who's, kind of getting cold feet on the whole thing. And then you have Duke, who's just, running the whole show. And then you have the Sushi girl, who is doing her job rather well, and just not moving, not talking. But you could tell that, she's affected by what's going on, in the sense of, when you see like her eye movements or hear a gasp or something like that. But, for the most part, she's in the background while the guys are, torturing Fish. But at the end of the day, though, was Fish telling the truth, or is there something going on that the gang doesn't know about? And that's where the one of the twists comes into play. So, okay, that was I guess you could say an abridged synopsis of the movie, and it's something that, like I said, it's not a movie that I'd want to see again necessarily, or anytime soon, I should say. But I did end up liking it in the sense that they kind of went all in on the sleazy underworld tone of the movie, because there are no good guys in this movie, with the exception of one or two innocent bystanders or something like that. But other than that, I mean, as far as the main cast go, I mean, they're all criminals. I mean, some of them may be less evil than others, but there are no good guys here. And of course, with the cast, I mean, you have these, actors that a lot of people are, such as myself, are very familiar with, basically, bringing their A games to the table, to make it to where, each of these characters, while they're all, while some of them are very sadistic and bloodthirsty, there is a certain level of enthusiasm involved that makes them stand out. But of course, you've got Tony Todd, the Candyman himself, playing Duke, the guy who's pulling the strings here. And, I've always known Tony Todd as a good actor. I mean, I remember him playing, Worf's brother in the Star Trek The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. And then, of course, Candyman. And, the guy is a very good actor, and he's a very intimidating actor, too. And here, he has a sort of, subdued menace, but it's a menace that's nonetheless chilling. And, I mean, I remember, like, there are points where, he'll be friendly with, some of the characters, but then, he'll be menacing with them. And it's a very, soft-spoken menace. And in particular, the scene where, he's telling Fish about the significance of the timer and how it pertains to, his own father's, mental and physical abuse of him. It's a very intense scene, because you have Tony Todd, just, opening up about this traumatic time from his childhood, or his character's childhood, and you actually see this, inflammable crime lord, basically just, getting chills going down memory lane, but then, he kind of comes back to the present, and, he's trying to convey the seriousness of the situation, saying, what happened to me, is now going to be on you, or it's going to happen to you now unless you talk. And it's a very intense scene, and Tony Todd just does a really good job of, bringing that, subdued and menace and intensity to the role. And you see him, basically as Duke, trying to, keep a handle on things. Like he's wanting to know where the diamonds are too. Like he's just as, impatient and as eager to get the diamonds as the rest of the gang are. But the thing is, because he's the ringleader, he's got to keep a certain, measure of control on his emotions. And so for the most part, he succeeds, but every now and then, that rage kind of pops to the surface. And Tony Todd just did a good job with the part. And he also served as one of the producers of the movie too, which I thought was interesting to know. And then you have Noah Hathaway playing the character of Fish. And Noah Hathaway is known by a lot of people as, the actor who played Atreyu in the first Neverending Story movie. And I never saw the show Battlestar Galactica, but he was also like a child actor on that TV show, I believe. So, seeing the guy who is arguably best known as playing, the character of Atreyu from Neverending Story, going from that to, the type of character he's playing here, I mean, it's quite a change, because what ended up happening behind the scenes was that the last thing that Noah Hathaway was in, like as far as movies go, it was in 1994, and then he just, went off and did his own thing. But, the people who were making the movie, they actually got a hold of him through Facebook, of all things. And that's how he ended up getting the part. And so this was literally the first movie he had ever been in since 1994. And he's really good in it. And if there's any character that you feel sorry for in this movie prior to, say, a certain twist or two coming into play, it's definitely Fish. Because, here's a guy who, while yes, he was a criminal, he's someone who had his own code. You get the idea that he had a sense of honor, in the sense that you don't rat on your friends or your accomplices, within the criminal underworld, right? And so while, yes, he's pissed off at, the gang for getting him into the situation in the first place, I mean, he is like, he has the whole honor amongst thieves thing going. And you also have moments where, like there's a moment where, after he's been released from prison, he gets on a payphone and calls, tries to call his ex-wife, and also talk to his little girl, because I mean he hasn't seen him or heard from him in a while, but basically they both just kind of turned their backs on him. and the only performance you actually see is his, and you just hear, you know, his daughter and his ex-wife and their voices on the phone. But the way Noah Hathaway plays it, though, you know, you see him going from hopeful to, you know, dejected and heartbroken, and it's a very good transition of emotions by way of, you know, his, you know, physical mannerisms and his, you know, facial tics, as it were. And so, you know, we definitely feel sorry for him in that respect. And by the time he gets to, by the time he's, you know, picked up from the prison and brought to, you know, the restaurant, you know, where the gang's at, I mean, he's very, you know, impatient and very bitter at this point. And we understand why, you know, because, I mean, he was already reluctant to, you know, show up to this meeting, you know, for understandable reasons, because the last people he wanted to see were the guys who got him into the fix that he was in the first place, you know. But at the same time, though, you know, he's going off of, you know, the wounded emotion of, you know, being cut off from his, you know, ex-wife and his daughter. And so it's like, we definitely understand, you know, why he's at the point where he's at in terms of, say, you know, his anger and his, you know, eagerness to be done with everything, you know. But then when things take the turn of, you know, him being put in the hot seat, as it were, you know, that's where we're like, oh crap, you know, you're about to have a really bad day, man. And I liked how, you know, we're kind of kept guessing, like, you know, is he telling the truth, or did he, you know, steal the diamonds and hide them somewhere, or did he maybe, you know, work with someone on the outside to hide the diamonds, you know, so that way it would look like he didn't do it? I mean, we're kind of kept guessing. But the thing is, you know, with the amount of punishment he's taking, and I mean, it is brutal punishment, you know, you're left wondering, okay, you know, either he's telling the truth or he's really trying to cover for someone that he cares about or something like that. You know, I mean, and there can't be much room for any other possibility. And so in that respect, you know, we actually do feel sorry for his character. And Noah Hathaway, he definitely, you know, brought a lot of, you know, emotion to the role. And so, like, when he's getting tortured and what have you, I mean, he, like, physically, you know, brings a lot to the table. So even though he's, like, you know, stuck to the chair he's in, like, physically speaking, you believe he's being tortured. And, you know, anytime he tries to, say, like, resist or something like that, I mean, it's the only, like, say, if he tries to smart off at the guys torturing them, that's the only form of resistance he can offer. And so Noah Hathaway, like, he does a very good job of, you know, bringing that sort of, you know, futile defiance to the table, you know, considering his situation. And there was a moment where I thought, I mean, and this is especially after having watched the commentary, but there's a moment that stands out with his character, and it's in the exact same scene where Tony Todd's, you know, character, the character of Duke, is talking to Fish, you know, about, you know, the significance of the timer and, you know, his, you know, traumatic story from his childhood and what have you. And so while Tony Todd definitely steals the scene, you know, with his monologue, you know, Noah Hathaway does a good job of playing off of him, because while he doesn't say anything during the scene, you know, you see him go through a whole gamut of emotions, you know, sort of a, you know, anger for being in the situation he's in the first place and being helpless, and also fear, you know, because as the story gets, you know, darker and darker, he's, you know, left with the clear idea that, you know, something bad is going to happen to him. Like, you know, the people that he's with, you know, the gang that, you know, he was a part of, they're going to do something to hurt him, and he can't do anything to stop it. And so, you know, he does a good job of, you know, showing both, you know, the anger and the fear, you know, just without saying anything. But there's also a bit of strange curiosity that he brings to the part in that particular scene, because, you know, while he's angry and terrified, you know, he's also kind of morbidly curious to hear what happens next. At least that's how it comes across with his facial manner characteristics and, you know, mannerisms that, you know, you see, you know, when he's, you know, watching Duke and listening to Duke tell the story. And in the commentary, some of the people actually felt like that was actually the point where Noah Hathaway had found the acting bug again, because they said that, you know, as you're watching the movie, or as they had started filming the movie, you know, I mean, he was trying to sort of find his feet again because it had been a while since he'd acted. But when he got to that scene, though, even though he wasn't saying anything, you know, it was like the stuff he'd, you know, gone through, like the training he'd had back in the day, all just kind of came back. And that was the scene where you're like, Noah Hathaway's still got it. So, yeah, I mean, you know, all in all, I mean, Noah Hathaway as Fish definitely did a good job. And while he wasn't, like, say, a straight up bad guy, I mean, like, he was a villain, I think, in the sense that, right, I should say, like, hold on, like, he's a criminal, but he's not a straight up bad guy. Like, he's not a sadistic psycho like some of these other characters are, you know, but, you know, he is a character that we feel at least some sympathy for, you know, considering that, you know, he's just been cut off from, you know, the people that he was wanting to see, and the fact that he's being put through a horrible situation. So, on the other hand, you have Mark Hamill, of all people, just stealing the show as the psychotic Crow. Crow's the one who was literally in a mental institution, okay? And so, you know, Mark Hamill, I mean, a lot of people remember him as, you know, Luke Skywalker from Star Wars. And a lot of reviews have said that, you know, his part as Crow is as far away from Luke Skywalker as you could possibly get. And, you know, and the other role that he's familiar with is playing the voice of Joker from all sorts of Batman-related stuff. And so, you know, a lot of the same reviews that point out that he's as far away from Luke Skywalker as he can get, there's definitely an echo of the Joker there. And so it's not him just imitating, you know, himself playing the Joker, but there is that sort of sadistic glee that his character, you know, derives from, you know, the idea of, you know, causing chaos and, you know, hurting others, or manipulating others, if you will. And, you know, and the one character that he actually seems to like, you know, is Duke, right? The guy who's running the show. But in terms of, say, the other people in the group, you know, he's constantly butting heads with them and pushing their buttons. And, you know, he does a really good job of just, you know, getting under people's skin and playing that kind of character. And so there are moments where, you know, he and Mark Hamill as Crow, I mean, he sort of, you know, is butting heads with the character of Max, you know, the bloodthirsty biker dude. And you're kind of, you know, trying to see, okay, which one of these guys is going to snap first? Because, you know, Crow is definitely more intellectual, whereas Max is more going straight for the throat kind of guy. But no, Mark Hamill, though, I mean, I knew that he could, you know, play, you know, twisted. I mean, what with his portrayal as the Joker, but this is the first time I'd seen him on screen playing a character like that, because, you know, with the Joker, it's all voice work. But here, though, I mean, like, physically in the flesh, I mean, he was having the time of his life, you could tell. But, you know, it was one of those things where you'd alternately be kind of, you know, laughing at some of his antics on screen here, but then other times you're just like, oh my God, you know, I can't believe, you know, he just did that, you know, to, you know, Fish or someone, you know, that kind of thing. Because let's just say that Crow, when it comes to extracting information, he likes to do so in a dental sense, and I'll just leave it at that. So yeah, Mark Hamill was definitely a surprise. I mean, considering that, you know, when you first think of him, you know, being in a movie like this, you're thinking, hey, maybe it's just going to be a goofy cameo or something. But no, he was one of the main players in this movie, and he was a surprise, and a good one. And then for the character of Max, let's see, it's a guy named Andy McKenzie. I'm not too familiar with his work, but, you know, basically, you know, I guess the role called for a sadistic biker dude, And, you know, Andy McKenzie just nailed it, because you look at him on screen and you can't help but think sadistic and creepy biker dude, you know, and, you know, he's very gruff, very, you know, sadistic, you know, very brutal, and you get the idea that, you know, he's a character that, you know, basically, you know, gets fueled off of hurting other people physically, hurting or killing people. Because, like, say in the Robbery flashback, you know, you see him as being the most sadistic member of the crew. And then, you know, of course, you know, there was the little story about him having, quote unquote, interrogated some of the officers they had on their parole, you know, trying to get information as to where the diamonds were, and then, you know, basically just ends up, you know, brutally killing them, you know, when they didn't give them any information. So you have that little bit of backstory about Max's sadism, you know, and even before they start torturing Fish, you know, there's this, you know, sort of impatience that his character has. You know, like, you know how some people, like, if they're in a social scene and they don't want to be there, or they're just waiting for, you know, someone to show up, or they're waiting for like the main event, like they have their fingers just boom, you know, on the table, right? Well, it's that taken up to 11 with his character, and like he's barely restrained, and the character of Duke, the ringleader, is just barely able to keep him under control. And so whenever he has a turn, you know, with Fish, you know, his, you know, torment tends to be, you know, some of the most brutal and bloody, you know, on screen. And so, yeah, it was definitely memorable in terms of, say, someone who is a straight up sadist. And, you know, Andy McKenzie actually just, you know, ran with it. But ironically, though, you know, if you listen to the commentary, you know, he actually sounds like a pretty chill dude, you know? It's just he has that look that says, hey, if you need a sadistic biker dude, he's your guy. And because he's actually played, you know, that kind of role in other things before, apparently. But this is my first time, I think, seeing him on screen. And, yeah, he was pretty good, in a very brutal way, mind you. And you have James Duvall, a.k.a. Frank the Bunny Rabbit from Donnie Darko. Yeah, you know, he plays Francis, you know, one of the less cold-blooded members of the group, and the guy who was the cokehead. And, you know, James Duvall, you know, he tends to play characters that, you know, maybe they're caught up in, you know, sordid situations, you know, but he does a good job of playing someone who, you know, yeah, he's caught up in, you know, this type of situation, but at the same time, he's not deriving any sort of joy or pleasure from it. And you get the idea that, you know, he wants to be anywhere but there, but he has to show up because, well, you know, he's one of the gang, and if he doesn't, well, they're going to start asking questions. And so, you know, with his part as Francis, I mean, I didn't think it was any big stretch for him to, you know, play that type of character, because he's played it in other stuff before I've seen. But at the same time, I mean, he does a good job with it. And, you know, you're kind of wondering, okay, you know, when's he going to take a turn? Because, you know, he's constantly saying, no, hey, why don't you have my turn? Why don't you have my turn when it comes to, say, torturing Fish and what have you? And, you know, there's that whole bit of, you know, Duke asking him, like, if he's going soft. And so, considering that the type of people he's with, you know, going soft is not a good thing. And so, you know, we're left wondering, okay, you know, is he going to be able to, you know, suck it in and take his turn torturing Fish? Or is he going to, you know, basically screw things up for himself even further and look like a weakling in front of the gang, which in turn will probably get him killed. So not a big stretch for James Duvall to play that kind of part, but, you know, he does a pretty good job with it. And then, you know, as far as like the main characters go, you know, last but certainly not least is Courtney Palm, who plays the Sushi girl. And for the majority of the movie, she's silent and literally fades into the background as, you know, the dish, you know, for the food, you know. But there'll be moments where, I mean, she becomes just kind of part of the scenery, but then something will happen. Like maybe one of the characters, you know, ends up getting angry, or maybe some of the torture, you know, Fish gets a little, you know, too intense, and you'll see her, you know, just react. Now, granted, she doesn't, you know, bolt up around by screaming, but it's like she's done such a good job of, you know, just laying there and being still, that when she does react to something, like when she goes like, or, you know, just her eyes blink or, you know, go wide or something like that, it stands out. Because for the most part, I mean, we're aware that she's there, but she just kind of blends into the scenery when, you know, the majority of the focus of the movie is on this cast of characters and, you know, this building storm that they've got going, in the sense that, you know, they're torturing Fish, or they're at each other's throats. I mean, all the focus is on them. And so when something does happen where that elicits a reaction from the sushi girl, I mean, it's kind of like she's there, you know? And she's not just catatonic, like she's actually aware of what's going on, you know, because, you know, there was a bit of a, you know, debate amongst the characters as to, like, when they first see her. I mean, at first, you know, some of them are kind of making jokes like, ooh, sushi, and, you know, you get the idea, right? But some of them are like, hey, Duke, is she in a coma or something? And basically Duke is just like, no, she's just been paid very well, you know, for her, you know, to be here tonight, you know, that, and to just lay there, you know, and be a dish, right? Or be a plate for the food. And so, you know, you're kind of like, okay, if that's the case, I mean, why is there just no reaction from her, you know? And then when she does have a reaction, you're like, okay, she's definitely not in a coma, she's not on drugs, you know, she's just very well trained, and she's, you know, very committed to her craft, as it were. And so, so she does a good job in the sense of, say, you know, playing someone who fades into the background only to, you know, pop in here and there in a surprising way that, you know, kind of reminds you that she's still a part of the story, and there's a story with her character that only comes into play at the end. And I will say the twist at the end involving her character was actually a good one. And, you know, at least the very first time I watched it, you know, I didn't really see it coming. You know, I was just thinking that, you know, she was just like a piece of scenery, as it were. But at the same time, I mean, when the twist comes in and you actually see her character emote and what have you, you know, that's where you see how, you know, not only was she good in her physical performance, you know, when she's just being the sushi girl on the table, but when you hear her talk finally, you know, it's kind of like, oh, okay, she's pretty good, you know? So, so yeah, I mean, you have this, you know, really good cast of characters here. I mean, you have, you know, the criminals who basically just steal the show, and then you have, you know, the sushi girl who's just, you know, does a good job of, you know, being a part of the scenery and then coming to life, you know, when the occasion calls for it, you know, especially, you know, towards the climax or the end. And another thing about this movie is that you have some familiar faces that are kind of like in, you know, brief cameos. Like you have Sonny Shiba, who plays the sushi chef, and then you have let's see, you have David Destin, I think is how you say his name, who plays you know, one of the members of the gang in the flashback who ended up getting killed, right? But you know, he, if I remember correctly, you know, was, amongst other things, he was in the first part of the new Dune movie, and he was also in Ant-Man and a few other things. But it was pretty cool to see him here in a kind of an early role. And you also have Jeff Fahey, the lawnmower man himself, in a, you know, memorable cameo in the flashback. You know, he's the guy who's, you know, basically, you know, running the jewelry store that the gang robs. And he ends up on the wrong end of a machete. I'll just leave it at that. But, you know, he does a good job with the brief amount of time he has. And, you know, he's both absurd and comical considering the circumstances. And you also have Michael Biehn and Danny Trejo playing two unfortunate security guards in the same flashback. And apparently with Michael Biehn, he actually showed up and did like one day's work for free because he was actually friends with one of the producers. And she's like, hey, could you do just like do a day's work for blah blah blah? And he's like, yeah, sure. And so it's cool to see these actors like that from certain genre of films that you recognize, and even if it's just like a cameo appearance, right? But it's kind of like, hey, spot so and so. But also another thing I liked about the movie is that while the setting is rather sparse, with the exception of say like the flashback, it's a really good set design, like in this restaurant. And in the commentary, you find out some interesting things about the actual building, where they filmed at and everything, and it sort of goes hand in hand with how it's shown on screen, because it's very ornate once you get inside. Like on the outside, I mean, it looks very dilapidated, but on the inside though, it's very ornate, very elaborate. And so while there's a sense of beauty there, there's also like an ominous feel, that kind of, goes along with what's going on with the story. And so, I definitely like, the set design and the sound design too, because, with certain scenes, when say, certain characters are performing certain actions, like say if they're dragging a chair, towards Fish, to sort of like plop it down and sit down in front of him, or say, one of them's, whirling something, and get ready to hit him, like the sound design, makes it sound like there's like an audible, rush of wind, or, when that's happening, or there's like this screeching sound, that gets in your ears when the chair's being dragged forward, like little things like that. So, so yeah, very good set design, very good sound design. And, basically just goes with sort of like this ornate yet ominous, setting, which goes in hand with the bleak tone of the story. So, as far as issues I had with the movie, I've alluded to it here, I think, but there's really no one to root for exactly, because there's really no good guy in the story. And I mean, a certain twist or two, notwithstanding, but for the most part though, there's really no one to root for, because they're all criminals. And while, some may be, less sadistic than others, they don't really give us a reason to be on their side, as it were. And the only character that, we can really sympathize with, up to a certain point, is the character of Fish, as played by Noah Hathaway. And Noah Hathaway does a good job of, kind of making you feel sorry for the guy, in a sense that here he is just being tortured, to the extreme. But on the other hand, though, I felt sorry for him, but I wasn't necessarily rooting for him, because it's kind of hard to explain for me, because he did a good job, playing someone, who is basically at the end of his rope, and he's being tortured, and you felt sorry for him in that respect. But there's really like no scene that kind of gives you a sense of catharsis when it comes to his character. Like there's no breakout or anything like that. There's no sudden badass moment, wherein like say somehow he is able to get one of his hands free and fight back or something like that. Like he's just like a helpless prisoner. So it's hard to root for him when he's not even given a chance, if that makes any sense. Whereas the rest of the characters, like they all did a good job with the parts that they had, and they did a good job in say, like in the case of Mark Hamill as Crow, I mean, there were moments where he was so gleefully sadistic you couldn't help but laugh. But at the same time, he was not a nice guy. He was a very bad guy, and a very cruel one too. And of course, you know, with Tony Todd, I mean, you know, he definitely had that dark charisma for the character of Duke, and he did a really good job with it. But once again, he's a bad guy, and you know, in the circumstance, you know, I couldn't root for the bad guy, if that makes sense. And same thing with you know, Andy McKenzie as Max. I mean, he did a very good job playing a bloodthirsty psycho biker, but you could not root for the guy because, well, I mean, because of how cruel he was. And also just, once you get past a certain point in the movie, like once you get past the point of, say, you know, the gang shows up at the restaurant, and then Fish shows up, and after the initial attempt to, you know, get him to talk of his own free will, and him, you know, basically refusing to budge, or basically saying, hey, I don't know where the diamonds are. After that point, the majority of the movie literally just consists of him being, you know, tortured in a very horrible series of manners. And so, or methods, I should say. And some of these methods that you see on screen, like, they're visually and audibly brutal. Like, we're talking, say, you know, not only, you know, punches to the face, right? I mean, that's kind of like small potatoes, but we're talking like, say, you know, one character literally puts his hand like right here and pushes in and breaks some of his ribs, right? And also, we're talking like, say, you know, teeth removal, Marathon Man, eat your heart out. And then, you know, the most brutal thing I could think of that they did to him was one of the characters, you know, takes a glass bottle, puts it into one of their socks, and then smashes it on the ground, and basically uses it as kind of like a sling slash mace type of thing, and just goes to town on the poor guy. And, you know, on one hand, it's a pretty ingenious method of torture, but the results are just, you know, painful and to behold and gruesome as all get out. And so when the majority of the movie, you know, past a certain point, consists of a bunch of dudes torturing another dude, and not in a, you know, abbreviated manner, you know, it's kind of hard to, you know, sit through at times. And so, you know, if I wasn't already invested in the story, you know, I probably would have just been like, okay, you know, let's fast forward through this, or, you know, let's go do something else or something like that. But because of, you know, the amount of effort that went into establishing things, you know, even though this was not something that I considered a good time, you know, for me, like in the sense of, say, you know, watching someone on screen getting tortured is not my form of entertainment, or it's not something I would consider entertaining. I was already invested in the story, so I definitely wanted to see how the story ended. And so I was given reason to kind of sit through things, if that makes sense. But the point is, I had to sit through that. So, so just bear in mind that when it comes to the torture scenes in this movie, they're very brutal and they're not fun. Now, there might be some dark humor, you know, courtesy of, say, some of the lines of dialogue, but, you know, it's kind of like, you know, you're laughing and you're like, oh my God, you know, why the hell am I laughing at this? This is horrible, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, it definitely has a very sleazy feel to it, to where, depending on your temperament, you know, it's something that, you know, you kind of want to watch something a little more lighthearted or uplifting afterwards, you know, because of just how, you know, bleak and, you know, violent the movie can get, you know, as past a certain point. So, all that being said, though, I'm gonna go ahead and give Sushi Girl 4 out of 5 stars. This was a good movie, just a very brutal and sadistic one, you know, at a certain point, and not something I necessarily want to see again anytime soon. But I definitely appreciated the fact that, you know, there was a certain amount of intelligence that went into, you know, getting things together or bringing certain characters to life. And as a result, you had characters that, while they were very much in the realm of evil, they were very memorable. So, and also, one of the things I should point out is just that, you know, one of the further things that kind of gives that sort of, you know, 70s throwback is the soundtrack, because like at the very beginning you have Diamonds Are Forever, and then you have at the very end you have that Isaac Hayes song. I think it's called Walk On By. It was the same song that was used at the end of the movie Dead Presidents. So so yeah, a very bleak, very violent movie, but at the same time definitely something that's well within the realm of exploitation and grindhouse, you know, type cinema. So 4 out of 5 stars. Not something I'd want to see again, but I am glad I saw it, and I have to commend the efforts of the people involved. So as far as, you know, special features go, you have Sushi Girl, a documentary, you know, which I didn't watch the whole thing, but the parts I did watch, I mean, you know, it basically, you know, consists of people who were both in front of the camera and behind the camera, you know, talking about how the movie came to be. And, you know, you got some informative stuff. Then you have alternate scenes, outtakes, and some of the outtakes were pretty funny. Then you have like this sort of, you know, fake TV commercials that, you know, they did sort of like in a sort of, you know, retro 70s style, with a bit of sleazy grindhouse feel. And then you have, let's see, and of course you have, you know, poster and, you know, promotional, you know, image galleries, behind the scenes photo galleries, storyboards, and the 2 commentary tracks. First one has commentary track with the director, Ken Saxton, and his fellow screenwriter, Destin Pfaff, Neil Fisher, and Suron M. Syrian, I think is how you say his name. That commentary track I haven't listened to yet, but the commentary track I did listen to, the cast commentary track, that was a very good commentary track. And as I mentioned, it's something that actually made me appreciate the movie more the second time around. But you have Tony Todd, Candyman himself, in this commentary track, James Duvall, Frank the Bunny Rabbit from Donnie Darko, and then you have Noah Hathaway, Atreyu, and then you have Andy McKenzie, bloodthirsty biker dude, actually, you know, proven to be a nice guy in real life, you know, behind the scenes and everything. And let's see, David Desmalchian, sorry. And I thought his inclusion was interesting, since that he didn't have that big of a part, but considering that, you know, he was in the movie as one of the gang members in the flashback, you know, it's interesting, you know, getting his, you know, participation. And you have you know, you have co-screenwriter Destin Pfaff, and then you have the director Kern Saxton. And so that particular commentary track I thought was a very good one, because it's very lively and very entertaining, and the guys are clearly having a good time, you know, hanging out with each other and, you know, talking about some of the behind the scenes stuff. But there's also some very, you know, touching moments, believe it or not. Namely, when it gets to that scene where Tony Todd's character, Duke, is having that monologue, and he's, you know, talking to, you know, Fish's character, to Noah Hathaway's character, you know, about the story about the timer. There's a very touching moment where, you know, basically, you know, both Tony Todd and Noah Hathaway take turns, you know, basically just praising each other, you know, for the work. I mean, not just for the movie, but in that scene in particular, you know, because they both felt like that, you know, they really brought their A games to the table in that moment. Not to say that they were slacking off throughout the rest of the movie, but here, though, they both felt like that they really saw a lot of, you know, raw talent in the other in that particular scene. And so I thought it was really cool, because, I mean, you know, here you got, you know, a guy who, you know, hadn't been in a movie since 1994, you know, basically finding his feet again, you know, and then a lot of the people in the commentary track were saying that, yeah, that scene, you got back. And then, of course, you have, you know, a veteran of the field, you know, Tony Todd, you know, who's been around a long time, you know, basically coming across like an elder statesman and just, you know, praising the younger generation. So a little unexpected moments like that, you know, definitely make the commentary track stand out. So that was a good one. But let's see. You also have Sushi Girl music video, Victories and Consequences by Send the Sages. I haven't watched it yet, but it might be good. Producer's diaries and trailers. So yeah, so you have a pretty good sort of grindhouse, you know, exploitation type movie, you know, with some, you know, good bonus material. So all in all, if you're a fan of, you know, grindhouse type cinema, or, you know, throwback exploitation films, or things that are inspired by Reservoir Dogs, or if you're a fan of any of the cast members in this movie, I mean, there's even a perverse novelty in the sense that you have, you know, Tony Todd, the Joker, you know, Frank the Bunny Rabbit, you know, all in the same room and all involved with, say, the prospect of torturing Atreyu from Neverending Story. So, so yeah, there is a sort of, you know, morbid, you know, curiosity to seeing the movie in that regard, you know, but yeah, it's like all the, you know, people involved in this movie, if you're a fan of any of them, like say, you know, if you're a Tony Todd or Mark Hamill fan, it's definitely worth, you know, checking the movie out just to see their work in this movie for sure. But yeah, so that was Sushi Girl. So 4 out of 5 stars. Thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. You got any questions, comments, please drop a line and let me know. And if you like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe. So y'all take care. Goodbye.